Imagine you are trapped in a collapsed mine.
That is a terrifying scenario to start with.
Yeah, it really is. Total darkness surrounds you. The air is thinning out.
Right.
The walls are pressing in, and, well, you have accepted the grim reality that this is the end.
You have made your peace with the dark.
Yes. But then, without any warning at all, a massive beam of sunlight breaks through the ceiling.
Wow.
And a hand reaches down to pull you up into the fresh air.
That would be staggering.
It is. It happens so fast, and the shock to your system is so severe that your oxygen-deprived brain just refuses to accept it.
You assume you are hallucinating.
Right. You assume it is a mirage. That feeling, that staggering shock of a rescue you did not orchestrate and, could not earn, is the precise starting point for our discussion today.
It is a great starting point.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am your host, and I am thrilled you have joined us.
It is great to be here.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into the source material of Charles H. Spurgeon's phenomenal work, The Treasury of David.
Specifically, we are looking at his commentary and the collected historical notes on Psalm 126.
Yes. Our mission for you today is to examine the theology of sudden deliverance, the paradox of holy laughter, and, well, the divine guarantee that sorrowful labor yields a joyful harvest.
It is an incredible text.
I'm sitting here looking at these historical notes, and I have to tell you, the sheer weight of what these theologians have uncovered in 6 short verses is massive.
It really feels like a huge discovery hiding in plain sight.
It does. We are going to look at how a historical event for the ancient nation of Israel points directly to the spiritual rescue of your own soul.
Which is such a vital connection to make.
I am buzzing with anticipation to get into this.
Well, it is a remarkable piece of literature.
Yeah.
The theological weight it carries is immense, and the way Spurgeon curates these notes provides a rigorous, consistent theological framework.
He really pulls from the best.
He does. The commentators he draws from spanning several centuries all recognize that this text is far more than a simple historical footnote.
Right, it is not just a history lesson.
No, it is a detailed, granular description of how a sovereign God interacts with a completely helpless people.
Which is very relevant for us.
As we examine the text together, we will see patterns of divine action that completely upend our human assumptions about how grace operates.
It flips everything upside down.
It really does. The progression of the text moves from a staggering past deliverance to a desperate plea for present grace, and then it concludes with a definitive, unyielding promise about the future.
It forces the reader to confront the reality of their own spiritual condition.
Yes, and the total sufficiency of God's intervention.
So let's start at the very beginning of the text. The title identifies it as a song of degrees.
Specifically, this is the 7th step.
Right. I was reading Augustine's interpretation of this, and he has a brilliant way of framing it.
What does he say?
He views the songs of degrees as songs of drawing upwards toward the heavenly Jerusalem.
Ah, I like that.
It is this idea of an ascent, moving from blessing to blessing. But the text itself, in verse 1, sets a very specific scene.
Right. When the Lord turned again the captivity of Zion, we were like them that dream.
It details the Lord turning the captivity of Zion, resulting in the people feeling completely stunned.
Yes.
Now, we have a note from Lancelot Andrews that asks a very specific question.
Okay.
He asks, why Zion's captivity? Why not the captivity of Jerusalem or Judah or Israel?
That is a great question because those places and people were led away captive too.
Exactly. Or, well, spot on. Andrews points out that Zion was just a hill on the north side of Jerusalem.
Right, just a geographical feature.
But it was honored above all the rest because it held the temple.
Ah, there it is.
The sorrow over Zion was not just sorrow over lost physical land.
Right. Losing your farm or your house is terrible.
It is, but the sorrow over Zion was sorrow over God's church and the loss of true worship.
That distinction regarding Zion clarifies the entire nature of the captivity.
The rescue of Zion was the rescue of the place where God's name dwelled.
This is far beyond a geopolitical event. When we look at John Hume's commentary from the year 1628, he lists all the times Israel was delivered throughout their history.
And he makes a crucial theological point with that list. Right?
Yeah, he does. He knows they served in Egypt for 400 years, and it was Jehovah, not Moses, who actually brought them out.
Right. Moses was just the instrument.
Yes. They were vexed unto the Canaanites, and Jehovah, not Deborah, freed them.
Okay.
They were oppressed by the Midianites, and Jehovah, not Gideon, delivered them.
So the pattern is very clear.
Hume's point is that while God employed human instruments, the policy and the execution were entirely divine.
Like with Cyrus the Great.
Yes.
Right.
Cyrus issued the historical decree to let the Jews return from Babylon, but the text attributes the action entirely to the Lord.
God weakened the loins of kings and opened the brazen doors.
Therefore, the turning of Zion's captivity is an act of sovereign grace, focused on the restoration of true worship.
The physical restoration of the land was secondary.
Secondary to the restoration of the people's relationship with God at the temple. It is a divine initiative from beginning to end.
That brings us back to the phrase, like them that dream.
Right.
The joy was so sudden and overwhelming it felt like an illusion.
The commentators give us several historical parallels to help us grasp the psychology of this moment.
Think about Peter in the book of Acts. You know the narrative.
He is locked in prison, heavily guarded.
Awaiting execution the next morning. An angel wakes him up, his chains fall off, the iron gates open on their own, and Peter walks out into the street.
But the text explicitly says he thought he was seeing a vision.
He did not think it was real.
Or think about the patriarch Jacob. He spent decades mourning his son Joseph.
Oh, that is a great example.
When his other sons come back from Egypt and announce that Joseph is alive and governing the entire country, Jacob's heart froze.
He could not process the information.
It was too massive a reversal of his known reality.
Another commentator, John Leclerc, mentions a secular example.
Oh, right, the Greek history.
Yeah. When the Greeks were conquered by the Romans, a Roman consul named Flaminius suddenly declared them free at the Isthmian Games.
The historian Livy wrote about that.
Yes, he wrote that the Greeks were stunned into silence. They looked at each other like sleepers waking from an empty dream.
The news was simply too good for their brains to process.
We also need to consider an alternative translation provided by William Bridge.
He was a prominent thinker from the 17th century.
Right, and his translation adds another layer to this psychological state.
He points out that the Hebrew word translated as dreaming can also mean restored to health.
Which is a very different image.
He references Isaiah 38, where King Hezekiah recovers from a terminal illness.
And he uses the exact same root word to describe being made to live again.
Bridge argues that translating it as restored to health shifts the metaphor.
How so?
Well, when a person is in a good dream or a bad dream, their mouth is not filled with conscious, intentional praise.
Right, they're just sleeping.
But when a person is suddenly restored to physical vitality after a long, wasting sickness, they are filled with conscious, waking gratitude.
Oh, I see. Both interpretations carry massive theological weight.
They do. Whether it is the cognitive shock of a seemingly impossible rescue or the sudden infusion of life into a dead body, the focus remains on the dramatic, instantaneous nature of the change.
The condition of the captive was hopeless.
And the intervention was absolute.
Okay, let's unpack this. I have a modern analogy, but I want to make sure it tracks with the theology we were discussing.
Go for it.
If someone goes to the store, buys a lottery ticket, and wins $100 million, they might say, I feel like I am dreaming.
Sure.
But that feeling is based on blind chance. They took a risk, the numbers lined up, and they got lucky.
Right.
The shock in this psalm seems completely different. Here, the shock comes from the sheer, unmerited grace of a sovereign God acting when all human hope was entirely lost.
Yes. Israel had rebelled, they had been judged, they had been deported, and their temple was burned to the ground.
They had zero leverage.
They had no lottery ticket. They had nothing to offer.
And yet, God acts. He steps into human history and reverses the irreversible.
Yes.
So how does this historical rescue of a small, ancient nation translate to the spiritual rescue of the person listening to us right now?
The connection to the individual listener is where the theology becomes intensely personal. Thomas Stint, writing in 1621, makes this connection explicit.
What does he say?
He argues that this text should not be applied only to Jewish captivities.
Okay.
He views the temporal rescue of this small nation as a direct prophetic shadow of the massive redemption of mankind.
Just as the Jews were delivered from physical bondage in Babylon,
Humanity is delivered from a far worse bondage.
the general captivity of mankind under sin, death, and the devil.
Yes. The deliverance purchased by the death and bloodshedding of Christ is the highest fulfillment of this psalm.
Stinn asked a rhetorical question about this, right?
He asks, what great matter was it for a little handful of people to be delivered from temporal captivity in comparison to the incomparable deliverance from eternal death and the powers of darkness?
So the historical event is a type.
Yes, pointing forward to the work of Christ.
The shock the believer experiences at conversion, realizing they are justified entirely by grace through faith, mirrors the shock of the exiles realizing they are free to go home.
The lottery analogy falls short precisely because the believer brings nothing to the transaction but the sin that made the rescue necessary.
That transition from cognitive shock to a physical reaction is where the text goes next.
Verse 2.
Yes. Verse 2 says, "Then was our mouth filled with laughter and our tongue with singing."
The people could not contain themselves.
The mercy was so unexpected that normal speech was too dull a thing to express it. They had to laugh.
And this laughter is observed by the surrounding nations.
The heathen look at this situation and are forced to declare, "The Lord hath done great things for them."
The outsiders recognize the divine origin of the rescue because it defied all historical precedent.
No other ancient empire ever voluntarily restored a conquered people to their homeland to rebuild their capital.
When the Assyrians or the Babylonians conquered a people, they scattered them to erase their national identity.
Right, returning them was geopolitical insanity.
It was so clearly supernatural that even the pagan nations had to admit God was behind it.
Then, in verse 3, the Israelites hear the outsiders talking, and they echo the statement, but they make it personal.
They boldly claim, "The Lord has done great things for us, whereof we are glad."
The reaction of laughter requires careful analysis here because it is not trivial amusement.
No, it is not. Martin Luther provides a brilliant insight on this specific point.
He writes that the gospel is nothing else but laughter and joy.
He states that this joy properly pertains to captives.
Those who feel the captivity of sin and death.
Yes, whose hearts are terrified with the feeling of the wrath and judgment of God.
For a person who understands the severe demands of divine justice, the realization that Christ has overcome Satan, destroyed death, and taken away sins produces an irrepressible joy,
Luther contrasts this with the terrifying burden of the law.
which he describes as being full of wormwood and the bitterness of death.
When the crushing weight of the law is lifted, the resulting relief is expressed as holy laughter.
Furthermore, the public nature of this joy is a core component of their worship.
Spurgeon warns against a poor modesty which attempts to hide joy under a bushel.
He argues that true gratitude loudly claims the blessing.
When God has done great things, it is practically a robbery of God to hide that light.
Believers are commanded to avow their joy and state the reason for it clearly to the watching world. But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at that for a second.
Okay.
Claiming that the creator of the universe did something magnificent for us might sound extremely arrogant to modern ears.
It can definitely sound almost boastful.
You hear people say things like, "God blessed me with this new house," or "God gave me this promotion," and it can rub outsiders the wrong way.
Right. It can seem like you're claiming you are somehow better or more favored than the person who did not get the house or the promotion.
When the Israelites said, "The Lord hath done great things for us," they were making an exclusive, massive claim about their relationship with God.
They were.
How do believers reconcile their own undeniable unworthiness with such a bold, triumphant claim? How is it not just religious arrogance?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and Malachi Harris, in a sermon from 1639, addresses the perceived arrogance perfectly.
What is his insight?
He states that the meanness of the receiver actually magnifies the glory of the giver.
Ah, I see.
The Israelites were not claiming they deserved the deliverance. On the contrary, their history was marked by constant unfaithfulness, idolatry, and rebellion.
Which is precisely why they were sent into captivity in the first place.
Harris asks, was it because they were so faithful? No, they had provoked God and forfeited his covenant again and again.
So the realization of their own total unworthiness, combined with the massive, unmerited grace of God, is what triggers the joy.
The bold claim is not about their merit. It is about God's staggering condescension.
When a believer says, "God did this for me," they are simultaneously saying, "I'm dust, I'm a rebel, and I deserve nothing but judgment."
It is the juxtaposition of total depravity and sovereign grace that makes the claim an act of real worship rather than an act of arrogance.
So it is the exact opposite of arrogance. It is radical humility resulting in radical joy. I love that.
It is a beautiful paradox.
Now the text makes a sharp turn in verse 4.
It shifts from praising God for a past rescue to pleading for a present one.
It says, "Turn again our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south."
We need to establish the geographical context here to understand the plea.
Right. The south refers to the Negeb, a desert region south of Hebron.
It is a harsh, sun-baked, arid landscape.
The terrain is carved with these dry channels, wadis that sit completely empty, cracking in the sun for months on end.
But when a sudden, massive rainstorm hits the mountains miles away, those dry wadis turn into raging torrents almost instantly.
A dry, dusty ditch becomes a rushing river in a matter of
The
minutes.
psalmist is looking at a situation that feels completely dry and dead.
And asking God to send a flood of deliverance just like those sudden flash floods in the Negev.
The geographical imagery here is highly specific and carries significant theological weight.
Joseph Carroll, a 17th century thinker, unpacks the implication of these southern streams.
He notes that people living in the Negev do not look for underground springs.
They know the earth there will not yield water.
Instead, they look to the clouds.
The water comes entirely from above, bypassing all natural earthly sources.
Carroll references the story of Elijah's servant on Mount Carmel.
Oh, that is a perfect parallel.
The servant looks toward the sea during a massive, prolonged drought and sees a clear sky with nothing but a tiny cloud the size of a man's hand.
Yet, within a very short time, the heavens grow black with clouds and wind, and there is a great rain.
The theological principle is that deliverance often comes when there is no visible earthly mechanism to produce it.
The believer is taught to look entirely to heaven, recognizing that God can produce a flood of grace in an instant.
Even when the immediate environment offers no evidence that relief is possible.
Let me try another analogy here.
Please do.
Imagine you buy a house out in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
There is no plumbing connected to a city water line. There is no well on the property.
So you are completely off the grid.
Right. If you turn on the faucet in the kitchen, absolutely nothing happens.
Because there is no water source.
You are relying 100% on a water truck driving out to your property and dumping water into a tank from the outside.
You have zero internal resources to draw from.
If the truck does not show up, you are out of luck. This text seems to be saying that spiritual deliverance is like that.
You cannot just dig deeper inside yourself to find the water.
It has to drop from the sky. So, how does this reality inform the way a person should pray when they are walking through a season of absolute spiritual dryness?
When they feel like that cracked, empty riverbed in the Negev.
Yeah, exactly.
What is fascinating here is the relationship between memory and faith.
How do they connect in those moments?
The prayer in verse 4, again our captivity, relies directly on the praise in verses 1 through 3. Memory of past grace fuels present faith.
Oh, wow. They use that established historical fact as the foundation to ask for the completion of the work.
Exactly. Matthew Henry notes that the beginnings of mercy are encouragements to pray for the completing of it.
When a believer feels completely depleted, their prayer should not be based on their current dry feelings.
Right, but on the objective reality of what God has already done.
They recall their initial conversion the first time their captivity was turned.
And they appeal to the same sovereign God to act again.
It teaches the believer to trust in divine timing.
Knowing that relief is not dependent on a slow, gradual accumulation of human effort.
It can arrive in a sudden, unannounced torrent from heaven.
That is the hope of the sudden floods.
That makes perfect sense. We have looked at the suddenness of grace and the floods of deliverance, but the text now moves into a very harsh, gritty reality.
Verse 5 says, "They that sow in tears shall reap in joy."
This is an incredibly famous line, but the historical notes show us this is not just poetic imagery about feeling sad.
No, this was a brutal agricultural reality.
The author W.M. Thompson provides some incredible context here.
Ancient farmers in the Near East faced immense, life-threatening danger,
Their fields were often located far away from their fortified villages,
making them prime targets for lawless raids.
Thompson points out the story of Job, where his servants were out plowing the fields and the Sabines fell upon them.
They stole the livestock and murdered the servants with the edge of the sword.
Sowing seed meant leaving the safety of the town walls and risking your life.
Furthermore, they were sowing precious seed.
In times of severe famine, taking grain and throwing it into the dirt meant literally taking bread out of the mouths of your starving children.
It was an agonizing decision requiring immense faith that the buried seed would eventually multiply.
The physical reality of the ancient sower provides the necessary foundation for understanding the spiritual application.
Thomas Adams divides this spiritual sowing into 4 distinct categories.
Sowing in faith, in obedience, in repentance, and in charity.
Each of these requires a sacrifice that feels like a loss in the present moment.
For example, sowing in charity means parting with resources that could secure your own comfort.
Trusting the promise that the one who sows bountifully shall reap bountifully.
Adams makes a brilliant observation regarding the difference between how nature operates and how grace operates.
In the natural world, a farmer desires a dry, fair seed time to get the crop into the ground smoothly without the seeds rotting.
But in the realm of grace, the wettest seed time produces the best harvest.
The tears of the believer water the spiritual seed.
Alexander Henderson also notes the hazards involved.
The seed is precious, the labor is agonizing, and the crop is subject to many dangers before the harvest.
The believer must resolve to undergo these hazards, risking property, comfort, and even life itself for the sake of the gospel. I am looking at a quote from Matthew Henry here. Weeping must not hinder sowing.
It means that when you are suffering, you must still be doing the work you are called to do.
But I want to ask about the mechanics of this. Are the tears themselves the actual seeds being planted?
Or are the tears just the emotional weather that accompanies the action of obedience?
Right. If someone is just crying because life is hard, or they lost their job, or they're dealing with physical pain, are they automatically going to reap a joyful spiritual harvest?
Or does the weeping have to be attached to a specific kind of labor?
That is my question.
That distinction is vital. General earthly sorrow does not automatically produce a spiritual harvest.
Yeah.
The tears themselves, when they are tears of a specific nature, are indeed seeds of comfort.
Matthew Henry clarifies that these are tears of sorrow for sin.
Our own and others, tears of sympathy with the afflicted church, and tears of tenderness in prayer.
Chrysostom adds a beautiful insight here.
He says that if you would be cheerful, you must be sad.
He notes that Christ came into the world to comfort those who mourn.
Thomas Watson, referencing Chrysostom, uses the miracle at Cana to explain this.
Christ caused the earthen vessels to be filled with water to the brim, and then he turned the water into wine.
In the same way, when the human eye, an earthen vessel, is filled brimful with the water of holy mourning and repentance, Christ turns that water into the wine of eternal joy.
Therefore, the tears are not a byproduct of general earthly hardship.
They are the specific, agonizing expressions of a heart breaking over sin and longing for righteousness.
It is this specific kind of tearful sowing that guarantees the harvest. If these agonizing tears are the water for the seed, then what exactly does the harvest look like?
Is it just a return to the status quo?
Verse 6 answers that by shifting the grammatical focus from the plural to the singular.
It says, "He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him."
This verse is a magnificent promise. The linguistic structure of the original Hebrew is fascinating here.
A scholar named Joseph Addison Alexander points out that the Hebrew uses an emphatic double verb.
Literally, it translates to coming he shall come.
This grammatical construct is designed to remove all contingency. It guarantees the harvest.
There is no might come or could come if everything goes right.
It is an absolute certainty.
And while this applies to any believer or gospel minister sowing the seed of the word, Arthur Pridham points out that the truest, highest fulfillment of this singular sepulchre, he is Christ himself.
Christ is the ultimate man of sorrows.
He went forth weeping. He sweat drops of blood in the garden.
He sowed the precious seed of his own perfect life, allowing himself to be buried in the dark earth of the tomb.
And because he did that, he will return as the victorious reaper, gathering the redeemed as his sheaves.
The word doubtless in the English translation captures the spirit of that Hebrew double verb perfectly.
Humphrey Hardwick, in 1644, commented on the absolute affirmations in this text.
He notes there is no item of contingency or possibility.
Heaven and earth shall pass away, but a jot of God's word shall not fail.
This certainty is grounded entirely in the character of God.
The harvest of a laborer in Zion's vineyard cannot be prevented by any earthly or demonic force.
When we look at Christ as the ultimate sower, we see that his affliction surpassed the natural measure of human grief.
Because he underwent the dread realities of death and the Father's judgment for the sake of his people.
Consequently, his pure delight as the eternal blesser of his people will excel all joy.
He will fill his bosom with sheaves in that day of joy, and the garner of his gladness will be filled to overflowing. So what does this all mean for the person listening to us today?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the application is massive.
If you are in the middle of a brutal, tearful season of obedience, if you feel like you are throwing the last of your precious seed into the dirt and you cannot see any green shoots coming up, you are not experiencing a failure of the system.
You are participating in the exact pattern set by Jesus Christ himself.
You are walking the exact same path the man of sorrows walked.
The pain of the sowing is not an indication that God has abandoned you.
It is the prerequisite for the harvest.
The tears are the irrigation for the crop.
You are holding on to a promise written with divine authority.
The return with rejoicing is not a probability. It is a guaranteed fact.
The guarantee is what sustains the believer through the winter of the soul.
George Horne uses the imagery of the changing seasons to illustrate this.
The seed lies dead and buried during a dark and dreary winter, and all seems to be lost.
But at the return of spring, universal nature revives.
The believer labors amidst persecution, affliction, sickness, pain, and sorrow, and often no profit seems likely to arise from those labors.
The believer will drop into the dust of death, and the storms of winter will pass over them.
Yet the day is coming when they shall reap in joy.
Christ arose, and he is now in heaven, from whence he shall doubtless come again with rejoicing.
With the voice of the archangel and the trump of God bringing his sheaves with him.
The harvest is an eschatological certainty. It is the final, undeniable triumph of grace over the curse of sin and death.
The progression of this text is a masterclass in theological structure.
We started by looking at the shock of sudden grace, where a rescue from captivity feels like an impossible dream.
We saw how the heathen nations were forced to recognize the hand of God in the deliverance of his people, and how the believers loudly claimed that blessing with holy laughter.
We discussed the arid geography of the Negeb, learning to pray for sudden floods of divine intervention from the clouds when the earth offers nothing.
We faced the severe, gritty reality of the ancient farmer, learning that the tears of repentance and obedience are the actual seeds of our future comfort.
And finally, we looked at the absolute, unbreakable guarantee of the harvest secured by Christ himself.
Who sowed his life in tears so that he could return with the sheaves of the redeemed.
It moves from the objective historical reality of God's sovereign deliverance in the past to the subjective, desperate need of the believer in the present.
And concludes with the unshakable certainty of the future.
The believer is commanded to look backward with gratitude, to look upward with desperate dependence, and to look forward with absolute confidence.
The tears of the present moment are not wasted.
They are carefully measured and utilized by a sovereign God to produce a yield that will last for eternity.
The work of sowing is agonizing, but the promise of the harvest is written in the blood of the ultimate sower. I want to speak directly to you as we wrap up this deep dive.
When you feel like your resources are entirely depleted, when your spiritual fields are dry, cracked dirt, and when every act of obedience feels like taking food out of your own mouth, recall that your tears are precious.
They are held by a sovereign God who does not waste a single drop of your sorrow.
To leave you with a final thought, consider the connection made by H.T. Armfield.
He points out that this psalm begins with the word dream and ends with the word sheaves.
This perfectly mirrors the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis.
Joseph had a prophetic dream featuring sheaves of wheat bowing down to him.
Because of that dream, he was thrown into a pit, sold into captivity, and endured years of tearful sowing in an Egyptian prison.
But God turned his sorrow into a literal salvation for the known world.
His captivity was the exact mechanism God used to produce a harvest that fed starving nations.
Consider how your current captivity, your current season of tearful sowing in the dark, might just be the setup for a harvest that God will use to feed others.
Think about that sudden beam of sunlight breaking through the collapsed mine.
The hand is reaching down. The rescue is certain. The harvest is guaranteed. We will see you next time.